By midsummer, the scene was infested by billions of large, aggressive flies. The major feature of the Battle of Verdun was artillery. The Germans had over 1,400 artillery pieces, and most of these were heavy or super heavy. The battle was marked by an unceasing duel of battery and counter-battery, as each side tried to destroy the other's artillery while concealing and protecting their own. Think of it as a long-distance game of cat and mouse. Artillery shells are measured by their width. This is a 40-millimeter shell that's been deactivated. It consists of two parts, all the explosives long ago been taken out of this one. Pass it around. It's really just a bullet on steroids. It's American in origin, and it has the date 1918 on the bottom. There would have been thousands of 40-millimeter cannons at Verdun. I'll spare you all the boring details of the artillery used on both sides, and we'll just hit the high points. Suffice it to say, both the French and Germans had artillery that could hit accurately targets 20 miles away. The fact that the Germans had used poison gas must have been in the mind of every French soldier the second he heard incoming artillery. Would it be the gas again? The German army brought to Verdun the biggest artillery pieces the world had ever seen. They had a dozen Austrian 305-millimeter howitzers that could fire a shell 850 pounds over 13,000 yards. That's 130 football fields. The German 420-millimeter Big Bertha fired a shell that carried 1,160 pounds of high explosive. These shells were almost 11 times wider than that shell there, and they were 6 feet tall. Imagine having those kinds of shells raining down on you if you were in a fortress or in a trench. It was common for soldiers to simply lose their minds during these bombardments and to run screaming out into the open, into certain death. Because of the range and accuracy of the artillery, soldiers on both sides soon learned nowhere was safe. Occasionally it becomes fashionable to characterize the French as cowardly, to sneer at them. You now know how mistaken that attitude is. Any nation that can fight as the French fought at Verdun doesn't have to prove its courage to anyone. I know Don was there because he brought home what my grandmother, in her own inimitable way, always called his Frenchy military medal, or more accurately, his medal militaire. It shows Joan of Arc with an upraised sword, and it says in French, "They shall not pass." At least 250,000 Frenchmen laid down their lives to ensure that vow was unbroken. Every French soldier who fought there received this medal. In April of 1917, America entered the war. Don received permission, as did all the Americans in French service, to resign from the French army and enlist in the American army as their units arrived. Eventually, in the summer of 1918, he joined the 82nd Infantry Division. If that division sounds familiar, it should. In World War II, it became the 82nd Airborne. It was commissioned August 25, 1917. Because it was composed of National Guard units from all over the United States, it acquired the nickname the All-American Division. To this day, the patch of the 82nd shows the AA to honor its division's proud past. I think the most interesting feature of Don's divisional patch is that it was obviously hand-sewn and not a mass-produced factory version. I can't explain that. The most famous member of this division was Sergeant Alvin York, winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor and the French Croix de Guerre. My grandfather, Robert Patterson, after whom I have been named, joined the United States Army in June of 1917, leaving behind my grandmother and their newborn baby girl, my Aunt Lucy. Since he was a college graduate and therefore a gentleman, the Army made him an officer, and he became an officer in the field artillery. He trained at Fort Bliss, Texas, and arrived in France in the early summer of 1918. As he disembarked, he, along with every other American soldier, received what looked to be a handwritten note from the King of England, George V. It read, "Soldiers of the United States, the people of the British Isles welcome you on your way to take your stand beside the armies of many nations now fighting in the old world the great battle for human freedom. The Allies will gain new heart and spirit in your company. I wish I could shake the hand of each one of you and bid you Godspeed on your mission." Upon his arrival in France, he was assigned to the 157th Field Artillery Brigade, which was attached to the 80th Infantry Division. It is from him that we get these aerial surveillance photos, which, you know, I think that you guys have already seen, or you certainly have an opportunity to see. Now, when we think of the Air Forces engaged in World War I, we invariably think of the combat aces, the Red Baron, von Richthofen, the Canadian, Bishop, the Frenchman, Gouinomer, the American, Eddie Rickenbacken. But the single most lethal killing machines of World War I were the men who flew surveillance and recon. It was they who unleashed the artillery. The historical significance of these photos is how early they came in American aerial surveillance. Remember, by 1918, it had only been 15 years since the Wright brothers had proved that men could fly. The concept of photographing enemy positions from the air in fixed-winged aircraft was less than 7 years old when these photos were taken, and the American Army Air Corps had been doing it for only a few months. They were the reason artillery could accurately hit targets 20 miles away. Today we take for granted the concept. It's said that a satellite miles above the Earth can photograph a postage stamp in a man's hand. In 1918, this was a radical new idea in war, and these photos represent its beginning. The last item I'd like to talk about is this small pamphlet entitled Combat Instructions, which includes the warning, confidential, not to be taken into the front-line trenches. What these instructions cover are the tactics of fighting a new war, of movement maneuver after almost 4 years of static trench warfare. It advises units to spread out, have scouts well in advance of the main party and along its flanks. It strongly suggests irregularity of formations and emphasizes the importance of speed and envelopment. It states the dangers of units being too dense, presenting inviting targets to artillery and machine guns.